We are very, very lucky to have Henry here with us today. He's the CEO and founder of Carta. Henry has agreed to come, so thank you. Let's give Henry a huge round of applause, and then we'll get started. You've now founded multiple things. The things you founded have grown and evolved. Yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about that.
You know, it's really funny. So I have this kind of weird theory that as a species, we're imitators. It's the Peter Thiel thing. You know, you should watch Competition vs. Losers. We're mimetic, all that kind of stuff. And you see it in like management books. Like if you're just like Jack Welch, you'll be successful. If you're just like Elon Musk, you'll be. You know, if you're just like Steve Jobs. And I think what makes founders unique is that they're all so different. They're sort of by definition the aberration. And there's archetypes, like you can try to group them, but actually what makes founders really special is that they actually don't fit into categories very well. You know, how do you categorize Steve Jobs? How do you categorize, you know, Elon Musk? And that's sort of by definition, the founders are finding the cracks in humanity that everybody else overlooked. And so you do have to be an aberration. You do have to be kind of weird. And so I'm definitely weird in my own ways. You know, everybody was like every family is happy in the same way, but unhappy in the different ways. Like every founder is weird in a different way. Maybe the thing that I think defines me in a more unique way is that the common trope is founders fall in love with a problem, and then entrepreneurship is a vehicle with which to solve that problem. And so you are just obsessed with this problem, whatever it is, you know, a game, robotics, whatever it is, you're obsessed with it. And then you build a company to solve this problem because that's the best way to do it. And I'm a little bit weird in that I was never obsessed with cap tables. Like that would be really weird. Like I just didn't care. But Carta was my second company. My first company died and failed. And when I came out of the trough of depression out of that one, I just couldn't imagine doing anything else. And so I'd fall in love with entrepreneurship. Like I just wanted to be a founder no matter what. And I didn't really care what problem I worked on. So to me, it was the inverse. I wanted to be a founder, and a problem was just a vehicle with which I could be a founder. And that's both good and bad. You know, the bad part is you might work on problems you don't really care about, like you don't like that much, like your cap tables. The good part for me and how it kind of translated was because I was agnostic to the problem, I was never married to the problem, right? Like if we were gonna work on cap tables today, because that was the most valuable thing to do, I was happy to work on cap tables. If we were gonna work on fund accounting, I was happy to work on fund accounting. If we're, you know, no problem was too boring, too lowbrow, too beneath me. If it helped build the company and move my founder journey forward, I would work on it. And that's different, right? Like you have to sort of find that what makes you keep taking one step ahead.
When you're faced with a problem that maybe you haven't spent your entire life thinking about, like cap tables, how do you make sure you win?
One paradigm to think about hiring is this, like, are you hiring missionaries versus mercenaries? And there's a lot of ways of describing it. Some people describe missionaries versus mercenaries. Keith Rabois talks about it's bullets versus barrels. You know, there's like different ways to think about this. But when you're hiring early, you tend to want to hire missionaries because they're in love with the problem by definition. They're just like, in love with the mission, and they'll ride the highs and lows, and no problem's too low for them and beneath them. They'll just do whatever it takes, and they're incredibly, if not incredibly loyal to you, they're at least incredibly loyal to the company that you're trying to build. Over time, that ratio, maybe starts with, by definition, when it's the two founders, it's 100% missionary. And it might be 10 people and you're 90% missionary, and you've got one person that's there for a paycheck. And over, when you're 100 people, it's 70% missionary. Over time, that ratio changes. And, asymptotically, the N+1 person you hire is really there for the job. But you still need to keep the missionary culture, and they tend to be the people closest to you, right? So, Carta's about maybe 2,000 people-ish now. Maybe 10%, 20%, 15% if I'm lucky, the population's missionaries, but they're probably the closest, to me. The problem with missionaries, of course, is they're really a pain to manage, right? Because sometimes you're like, look, can you just do what I told you to do and not, give me a lecture on it? Like I paid you to do the thing. I don't need to convince you that, there's a philosophical purpose for this. And that's why you do need the balance, right, of the missionary versus mercenary. And then I think it's a long-winded way of answering a question around culture is then the culture gets built around the missionaries you decide to hire. And that's the mission culture.
How do you identify new missionaries? Are you saying that most of the missionaries at the company now have been with you for a long time? are you creating new missionaries along the way? And how do you sort of, as a CEO, identify that and pull that up into sort of, the thing that you're doing?
It's really hard, and I think it's different for every CEO. For us, especially in the early days, I would say, so today we pay above market. Like if you just look at our comp, we just sort of pay above market for a variety of reasons. But in the early days, it was a rule. You had to take a pay cut to come to Carta. Like the first 20 people all took pay cuts. The reason for that was two things. One was to test how bad they wanted to be there, right? If they're a mercenary, they'll only come if they get paid more. If they're a missionary, they'll come if they get paid less. And then two, it really forced me to be able not just recruit, but inspire the people to come, right? Like if I'm like, look, you're gonna make $20,000 less than you're making today to come, now the burden of proof is on me to convince them that that's worth doing. And we're an equity company also, so it's like, hey, I give you equity, and you got to believe in the equity, and you got to believe in the equity story, and all that kind of stuff. But it then forced me to elevate my game, because if I couldn't convince these people to take a pay cut to come to Carta, I wasn't good at what I did, and that was my litmus test. I don't know if that still works anymore in a very different world now. But that was what we did. That was our hack.
You had one company that didn't quite make it, one company that has clearly achieved product market fit. What does product market fit mean to you? And what advice would you give to founders that are sort of in this stage right now where they haven't quite gotten it yet, they're racing towards it?
Mark describes it, in his writings, as like product market fit is when you can feel the market pull the product out of you. And I remember that moment, and we were selling cap tables, and doing our thing, and we changed our phone system. Back then people would actually call in to buy cap table software. So we changed our phone system, and it was like it was like Ring Central to Dialpad or whatever, and it was like how you like press 1 to talk to sales, press 2 to talk to support, whatever. Somehow we messed it up. So when you hit 1 to talk to sales, it just hung up. And we didn't know for like 3 weeks. And the only way we found out we were just still like selling so many cap tables. And the only way we found out is somebody somehow got their way through our support channel and was like, I've been trying to buy cap table software from you for like 2 weeks and nobody will pick up. What's going on? And that's the only way we figured it out. And then we're like, wow, we might have product market fit. Like if like people are finding, no matter how bad we are at, selling this stuff, people are finding a way to buy it, in spite of us. That's a really good sign. The problem or the challenge, or maybe the mistake that founders often run into, is it's sort of like the George Washington thing, like don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Founders start spending a lot of money on sales quickly. They're like, oh, I got the product. Now it's a sales problem. And the problem is if you start selling before you figured out product market fit, good GTM can actually hide bad product market fit for a while. And then what happens is GTM's expensive, fucking expensive. It's incredibly expensive. It's actually far more expensive than R&D. I mean, all the money, it's one of these unusual things. 10 years ago, right, everybody was using open source software. AWS, we're dramatically lowering the cost of creating a startup. And we think we helped with that. Like Carta's mission was to create more entrepreneurs, create more founders by reducing the cost of starting a company. And our thing was not compute or software, ours was legal fees. Let's reduce the legal fees so that more founders could start companies. So we dramatically, between 2010 and 2015, the world dramatically reduced the cost of starting a company. But the rounds kept getting bigger. Why? It doesn't make sense, right? Why does it cost more money? And it's that economic theory of the more abundant something becomes, right, the more demand gets created. So it got cheaper and easier to make startups. So then to actually be a successful startup required way more cost to break out. And that's where all the money goes. So anyway, the mistake that a lot of founders make is they don't wait till they see the whites of their eyes before they fire, and they start selling and investing in sales too soon, which hides the product market fit. And the thesis I always give is the first thing any founder wants to do after they build the product is hire a VP of sales, because they hate selling, because most founders today are product founders. So they hate selling because selling sucks. They don't want to do it. And so like, I'll just hire a VP of sales, problem solved. My angel investments, what I say is like, hey, wait as long as you can before you hire a VP of sales and do all the sales yourself, because you're the only one that will feel the market pull. Wait as long as you can before you hire a VP of sales, and then just wait a little bit longer. Because what I see all the Series A companies that don't make it is they raise $10 million, $20 million, they hire a bunch of salespeople, they burn through it, and they didn't have product market fit.
As a founder CEO, at some point you go from making all the decisions to creating systems and still making a couple of decisions. And as you evolve, you also have to sort of train yourself. So if being a founder is like an athlete, what is part of your training regimen?
I do this thing with executives, which is whether I'm promoting executive or hiring executive, I'm like, hey, imagine it's a CFO. Hey, what's the difference between working for a CEO, working for me, versus every other boss you've ever had in your career? And most of them will give business school answers. Well, you have to be cross-functional and you got to be strategic and whatever. And I say, that's probably true. But the biggest difference is it's the first time in your career you've worked for somebody that knows less than you do about what you do, right? Like you're a CFO, you spent the last 20 years, you were an analyst, and then became a director of finance and a VP of finance. And, every stage of the way you worked for somebody that used to do your job and they did it really well. Otherwise they wouldn't have got promoted. And then now you work for me and I've never done finance. I've never been a CFO. I'm very sympathetic. I'm compassionate. I always say like, it must be so disappointing, right? You spend like 25 of your career grinding it out, climbing up this ladder to one day be a CFO and work for the CEO, and you realize he's an idiot. Like he knows nothing about what you do. And so my interview question is always, well, so how do you deal with that? And then you go into a conversation about like, am I hiring you to tell you what to do versus I'm hiring you to tell me what to do, right? Which is another framework to think about hiring. The reason I say that is then the flip side, the founder or the CEO is, okay, well, if everybody in your exec team, the 8 execs you've got, all know their jobs better than you do, what do you do? Like, where's your value in this? Like, how do you be the CEO that the CFO, who knows way more than you do about CFOing, how do you have a 30-minute meeting with them and they walk away going, that was really helpful. Like, Henry, that's like, I'm really glad I met with him. And that's the challenge of being a scale CEO. And the reason I tell that story is I think that's the challenge of being early stage, right? Is there's some things you'll be an expert in, there's others you won't. But how do you be relevant to everybody that you have to engage with? Whether it's your new head of product or your new engineering lead or the support person on the team that's doing customer calls, an investor, right? How do you be relevant to all these constituents that by definition know more than you do about their narrow slice? And I think that's the challenge of being a founder over time.
At some point, the company gets big enough or broad enough where you can't know all of the things. How much do you as a founder focus on inputs versus outputs as a shortcut to this exact thing?
It's so timely because I talk about this, we were talking about this last week in our exec meeting about inputs. It's very easy for a company to become outputs. How much did we book? How much did revenue? Partly why that's true is because that's kind of how we're wired, and we want to win, and it's points. That's the scoreboard and all that kind of human psychology. The other part is just organizational, right? Like your team's going to come to you and they're going to be like, crushed it. Let me show you how I crushed it. My favorite story. We're an inputs company, and I have to keep reminding my exec team because they always want to talk about revenue. Did we hit our quarterly revenue numbers? And I always tell them, revenue's a lagging indicator. That's the last thing we should look at. Like it's totally lagging. We should look at everything else other than revenue that drives the revenue and focus inputs. But that's not what people will bring to you. And the story or analogy I use is, I forget what the game was, but there's a commentator, Draymond Green, Warriors player, not the best shooter. Anyway, there was like the game was on the line, the Warriors something, the game was on the line, everything. And the ball was, of course, supposed to go to Curry. Didn't happen. It went to Draymond, and he shoots a 3. He never gets threes in, but he got it in this time. And it was the buzzer beater, won the game. And the commentator was like, what a brilliant move, by Steve Kerr to give it to Draymond. right? And the coach, analyst that was there was like, no. That's an outputs-driven model. It was actually a terrible move. They got lucky, but in no world was that the right play. And in fact, it wasn't. They tried to get to Curry, but Curry was too, and Draymond just made a decision and it worked out. But that's the difference in outputs versus inputs, is the outputs go, next time we'll do Draymond again. But that's the wrong answer, right? The answer is always inputs. You go to Curry.
What have you built inside of Carta to make sure that the team stays inputs focused?
I don't do as much as I should and would like to, but writing is an incredibly powerful tool. If you're a good writer, and I highly recommend becoming a good writer, and I can give you tips on how, but being a good writer it's like being a good coder or a bad coder. Like it makes a big difference. The writing is incredibly powerful because one, it like codifies everything, but it becomes a reference Bible that when teams are getting together and arguing about stuff, it's the checksum on the manager, right? The somebody on the team goes, well, Henry wrote that, and we should be doing that. And so writing is incredibly powerful. I have a Slack channel called Henry, and it's just my channel. I'm the only one that's allowed to post. So it's a read-only channel, right? It's just, cool. It's basically my kind of internal newsletter. People can post on the replies, but they can't do the main messaging. So it's just, and it's been there since 2014. Like you just see, any employee can come and like see everything I've written. And it's things from, eShares 101 and our culture to our strategy to, here's a trip from Rio, our office there, and here's what I'm thinking. And that's my way to continually reinforce the culture, or at least I would say codify the culture. And then the reinforcement comes from hiring. Colin Powell's thing, I always forget the quote, but something like, the organization will degenerate to the lowest standard you allow. And so it's like, I was just this morning before I came here, product and R&D did something really stupid. I was just like, I can't let this one go. Like, it's just, otherwise they think it's okay to do stupid things. And you get lazy. You're like, do I really want to argue about this stupid thing again? And you just have to. Otherwise you let that one go, they do stupid things.
All these founders are busy building. They're gonna be raising their next round here in just a couple of months, few short weeks, few short months. Maybe talk a little bit about any advice that you would have for them. I mean, you talked a lot about your early investors and how important they were to you. And so, yeah, would love to hear any of your advice for early stage investing from the other side, from the founder side.
So the thing I learned in the early stages, I don't know if this is still true, but I think it's probably directionally true, is I remember my first pitch. It was so bad. They walked me out the back door. Like I couldn't even leave at the front. They're just like, here's the exit to the stairway. And I was like, so embarrassed. And it was just the fucking worst. You could only go up from there. And this was also before they like treated entrepreneurs more respectfully, before, Andreessen was like, don't be late for an entrepreneur. I mean, this is where they kept you waiting. This is the, you think I'm joking. I'm not. I would go to pitches in the evening to pitch to angel investors because they'd have all these angel networks. And it was basically like, I don't know, it's like a drunk sporting thing that you went to. Like you go up, they'd be drinking beer and heckle you while you're pitching. It's like a stand-up night for pitches. And it was brutal. I would say, raising capital is never easy. It's not easier now, but it's more civilized. But what I realized in those days that I think is probably still directionally true is I thought, I got escorted out the back exit because I wasn't charismatic enough. Like I was like, I just didn't have it. And what I realized through it is, especially in early stage, it's more like sales. It's not the type of sales you think of like the charismatic salesperson that can sell snow to Eskimos, which I think is more true as you get later stage, but it's about filtering. It's like finding the right customer. And I could tell, after I got good at this, I could tell, within 5 minutes if they were going to invest, because the litmus test of whether you were going to invest in a cap table software company was if you cared at all about cap tables. It had nothing to do with how do you make cap tables sexy? Like there was no charisma around cap tables. It was either I explained the cap table story and they're like, I fucking hate cap tables too. Somebody should solve this problem. I'm interested. Or they're like, the fire exits there, right? It was just like, you could just tell, right? And so what I realized, it's finding people that connect to your problem. And so you could be really efficient, right? You're like, I would tell them, hey, I can tell you don't care about cap tables, and frankly, I don't blame you. But like, you're never going to invest. You don't have to, humor me and stick around. Like, we'll call it a day until you find the people that did. And I think a lot of founders, understandably, are like, they do 3 pitches, they get no's, and nobody cares about. And they're like, I must suck. But it's just they just didn't connect to your problem set. That doesn't mean your pitch doesn't matter. Once you do find the person that connects to your problem set, then yes, how you talk about it, what you're doing, your strat, like all that stuff really does matter. But what I try to encourage founders, like when they're feeling really beat down because they think it's a charisma problem, I tell them I don't think it is. I think it's a filtering problem.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your transparency. This has been amazing. Everyone give Henry a huge round of applause. Thank you. That was great.
When you're early stage, you're just building a thing. But when you get to a certain level of scale, you're not building a thing, you're building a system that builds a thing. If the team comes to me and they don't know how to make a decision, hey, Henry, should we do A or B? And what that says to me is I didn't give them a systems framework for how to make that decision. And I think that skill I still, am learning and practicing every day.